Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. May Brahman protect us both, the teacher and the disciple. May he nourish us both. May we both work together with great energy. May our studies be vigorous and fruitful. May we not hate or criticize each other. Om. Peace, peace, peace. We have come to the last chapter, chapter 4 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Today we will be doing the sutras from 19 to 23. We see that the world, the external world, the world outside, the thoughts within, the mind inside, they're all changing all the time, continuously. Now, if everything is changing, both inside and outside, including our mind, how do we experience things? How can we experience when everything is continuously changing? Patanjali says, we are experiencing because there is a constant factor. There's an unchanging background reality. We call it the Purusha, the self, the Atman, the ground reality, whatever name you use, it is there. And that is unaffected by all the impressions that we throw on it. We collect from the external world and throw on that, but it is unaffected. Like all the images that you throw it on a screen, on the movie screen or on the television screens, so many images come, but the screen is unaffected. That reality is like that. And because of that reality is there, we are able to experience things. So in Sutra, the last Sutra, Sutra 18, Patanjali said that Purusha is the eternal witness of all the modifications of the mind. Now in the next few sutras, Patanjali supports that statement through a series of reasoning. So the first one he puts forward is Sutra 19, Natat Swabhasam Drishyatvat. The mind is not self-luminous, being an object. The mind is an object. It is not self-luminous. What is meant by object? Object is something the subject perceives, experiences. It appears to us that we know things, or it is the mind that thinks, that knows. But Patanjali says that the mind shines because the self is within. Whenever we objectify a thing, the conscious entity is not that object, but us. I see, I hear. I'm the conscious entity, not that object or what I hear or see. The mind is not conscious. It is because the consciousness is there behind, inside, we see all these things outside. When there is no consciousness, the mind does not work. Say, a person is in coma, we don't experience, consciousness is not working, the mind is not connected with the consciousness, or consciousness has left the body, the dead body, all the organs are fine, but don't experience anything, don't perceive anything, because consciousness is not there. It is like the image that we see on the mirror. Say, at night, you stand in front of the mirror. If you put the light on, then you can see your reflection. If you turn the light off, you are there, the mirror is there, but you can't see the image because the light is not there. The light of consciousness is reflecting on the mind, only then the mind will perceive things. So it is like So we can say the mind is like the moon, not like the sun. The sun is self-luminous, but the moon's light is reflected light. So the consciousness, or we feel that the mind is conscious, mind is illuminating everything. It's not its light. It's a reflected light of the Atman, the Purusha. And so we can say mind is not a seer. Mind is an instrument of the seer. Mind is an instrument of knowledge, of the seer, the real seer, the Purusha. It's an object of perception, just like in the things in the external world. In the Drigdrishya Viveka, Shankaracharya takes it step by step, starting from the external objects. He says the things that we see externally, when Shankaracharya says see and I, it includes all the five senses and the five sense of objects. Things that we see, things that we hear, touch, smell, taste, everything is included. As an example, as a representative, taken the eye and the things that seen. So in that, the objects that we see outside is the seen, the perceived, and the eye is the seer. But then sometimes the eye is tired, we don't see, or we see things, we are engrossed in something. I'm engrossed in listening to music. I put on my headphone, I'm listening with great interest to a music or talk. Somebody walks in front of me or come and stand near me. The eye has seen, but the mind is not there. So actually, what is the seer there? The mind is a seer. The eye, the senses, and eye, ears, tongue, nose, all these senses becomes the seen. Then again, going further, one step further, the self becomes the seer and the mind becomes a seen. I understand that my mind is disturbed, my mind is agitated, my mind is calm. So who is seeing all the fluctuations, the modifications of the mind? The mind has become the seen, the perceived, and the self, the Atman, has become the seer. The objects, external world, there are many objects are there. The senses have got many different states of modifications or experiences. The mind also is changing all the time into various states. Mind is sharp, dull, happy, sad. And how the mind experiences, perceives the external objects depends according to the fluctuations of the mind. If the mind is happy, the external objects or ideas or people seems good, pleasing. I'm in a happy state of mind, everything is nice. Even if something bad happens to me, I'll say it doesn't matter. But if my mind is sad, the state of mind is disturbed, a small, casual remark from somebody will upset me. So how we experience or perceive things externally depends upon our state of mind. And the mind is changing all the time. And who is seeing all this? So somebody is observing that fluctuations of the mind. So mind is an object of perception. And the Atman, the self, is always conscious, and that is the real seer. The mind is not always conscious of objects, but the Atman is always conscious. It never becomes unconscious. The unchanging self provides a standard by which all the perceptions can be measured. And we can see this fact that the mind is just a seen or perceived when you think about how in the deeper levels of meditation, the person goes into deeper and deeper levels of meditation. The mind, as he moves deeper within, he leaves the earliest stages of or levels of mind behind. So the first state of mind was the seer earlier. And then when the person goes deeper, that first state becomes the seen, and the new state becomes a seer. It goes deeper and deeper. And ultimately, the Atman is the real seer. And that happens because the mind is not self-illuminous. Being self-illuminous Atman, it illumines everything else. And Patanjali further elaborates this statement that the mind is not self-luminous by another reasoning. In Sutra 20, he says, Eka samaye cho ubhaya anavadharanam. From its being unable to cognize both at the same time. Why do we say the mind is not self-luminous? Because the mind is unable to cognize both at the same time. The external world and the Atman within, the self within. The mind cannot see both. If the mind is turned towards the external world, then it sees the external objects. But if the mind is completely pure and can turn inside, inwards, then it can see it can reflect the Atman, but it cannot do both. Cognition happens when the light of consciousness, Atman, falls on the mind. When that mind is that illumined mind, the mind illumined with the light of Atman, the light of the Atman falls on the mind and the mind is illumined. When that mind is turned towards the external objects, then we say, I see the object, I hear the sound, I smell the fragrance. But the mind cannot do all those actions, the external perception and reflect the turn towards the inner light at the same time. If the mind was self-luminous, it could perceive both the Atman and the external object. But we say that it cannot do that. It can do only one. So the conclusion is, the mind is not self-luminous, only the Purusha is self-luminous. The reason, because it cannot illuminate both at the same time, the two together. Then he goes further in the next sutra, Sutra 21. Chitta andara drishye buddhi buddhiradi prasangaha smriti sankarascha. Another cognizing mind being assumed, there will be no end to such assumptions, and confusion of memory will be the result. We said now that the mind is the seer, the seen, and the self is the seer, the Purusha, the Atman is the seer. Now, I don't want to talk about Atman. I don't want to accept the idea that there's Atman exists. Why should we have Atman? Why can't we say that another mind see this mind? All right. Mind A is seen by mind B. Then who is seeing mind B? With the existence of mind B, we bring in another mind C comes. Then who is seeing mind C? Mind D comes. Then who is seeing mind D? It goes on indefinitely without any end. It will cause confusion. Because each mind would have it in its own memory, its own buddhi, intellect, intelligence. And then which memory shall we accept? Which intelligence will we follow? It will be utter confusion. But we say that in the world, it's not like it doesn't happen like that. A human being is not confused about its memory unless you got mental disturbance. It's impossible to assume that there are many buddhi or intellect working in the same individual, because there is the buddhi is harmonized and coordinated in our mind. All the various experiences that mental experience that we have, all the experience we get from the external world, our buddhi harmonizes it and keeps it as memory. So how can we have different buddhis in the same individual? Now, if you accept different minds, then there will be different buddhis also. So that argument doesn't hold. That shows that there cannot be several buddhi, and for that reason, several minds working in the same individual. There can be only one mind, and behind that one mind, one consciousness. The mind is having various states, not many minds. When I say my mind is very happy, my mind is sad, I don't have two minds, it's the two states of the mind. The mind is fluctuating from one state to another, but it's the same mind. The mind can be disturbed, can be serene, happy, calm, but all this is different states of the same mind, and all this is observed by the same consciousness, the same seer behind the mind. The seer is constant, unchanged, and perceives all these things. So when we realize that there's only one Purusha or self who perceives all the mind in its entirety, in all its different moods, different modifications, and it's not that there are many minds. No, only one mind, got different modifications, and all this is seen by the Purusha. Then we won't have any problem. Otherwise, you'll be bringing in another mind to see, and then it goes on indefinitely, and it will be causing confusion. Next sutra. Chitera pratisankramayaha tadagaravatau swabuddhi samvedanam. The essence of knowledge, that's a Purusha, being unchangeable. When the mind takes its form, it becomes conscious. The essence of knowledge is unchangeable. And what's the essence of knowledge? The Purusha. It is unchangeable. And when the mind takes that form, it becomes conscious. This sutra is trying to answer the question, how can we know consciousness itself? Consciousness, the light of the Atman that illuminates the mind, how can we know that? This sutra is trying to answer the question. When we observe anything or for any perception to happen, we have to take into consideration three factors. The external world has to be there, or external world or the objects has to be there. Then the mind inside, and pure consciousness deep within. Only when we have got all these three together, then perception takes place. Normally, consciousness functions through the mind and helps the mind to perceive and understand objects. So, knowing is the function of consciousness. See, consciousness functions through the mind, and when the consciousness is illuminating the mind, then the mind perceives, knows, understands everything, external objects. And when the consciousness functions through the mind, something external or other than the consciousness is known. When the consciousness is working through the mind, then we know external things, not the consciousness. The mind perceives something other than consciousness, external to the consciousness. But when the mind is free from association of all the limiting adjuncts or association with the mind stuff, it automatically turns itself and illuminates its own nature. See, consciousness first. See, first we say consciousness associates with the mind, and then it illumines the mind, and see, we see the external objects or experience, perceives external things. External things or things external to the consciousness. But when the mind is free from all these limitations, when the mind is completely pure, it turns within, and then it shines on the Atman. That's the only way to realize the pure consciousness. And this is because consciousness is self-luminous. That's what we said earlier. The mind is not self-luminous. We started with that argument. Mind is not self-luminous. Purusha, or the self or consciousness, is self-luminous. And because consciousness is self-luminous, it can illuminate everything. It can illuminate the mind. It can illuminate itself. When the mind in its subtlest form is transcended, the mind has gone deeper and deeper in the meditation. The person goes deep within the mind. Mind has got different layers. They all go layer after layer, going deeper and deeper within. Then even the subtlest form of the mind, layer of the mind, is transcended, gone beyond that. Then the reality, the Atman, stands revealed. That's the aim of the yogic practices. And in that state of samadhi, the perceiver, the perceived, the act of perception, all becomes one. That's why Vedanta says, Brahmavid Brahmaiva Bhavati. The knower of Brahman becomes Brahman. It is when ordinarily we say we know, I know this table, I know this book. I don't become the book, because that's something external to me. But Brahman or the Atman, when you realize that, you become that, because there is no separation there. So when we look at this consciousness like this, consciousness go deeper and deeper. To realize the consciousness, to go deeper and deeper within you, and even the last subtlest layer of the mind is transcended, then the pure consciousness stands revealed. When you realize, when you think like that, then we see that this, applying the ordinary methods of modern psychology, we cannot understand the true nature of consciousness. What are we doing in when we apply the methods of psychology? They are trying to observe the functions of the brain. So in its ordinary manifestation through the physical brain, we are observing consciousness covered by several layers of the mind. So actually we are not seeing that, we are not experiencing consciousness. We are trying to observe the consciousness covered by layers of mind. That's when it comes to the brain. So we have to remember that in these few sutras, Patanjali is trying to explain the true nature of the mind. He's trying to explain what is the true, real nature of the mind. Because mind is the instrument that we have to deal with the external world and the internal world. Because the Lord, bigger than the, or larger than the external world, vaster than the external world, is the inner world we have got. And mind is the instrument that we have got to deal with it. What happens in our ordinary life is we identify with the mind, and the mind in its turn identifies itself with the external world. External world, and also with the thoughts inside us. The mind identifies with the external world and thoughts inside. And we identify with the mind. That causes all the problem for us. Now we have to remove this identification. And that can, for that we know that we need to know the true nature of the mind. If we know the true nature of the mind, then we would know how to function in the world and how to handle the situation as they arise. That's why Patanjali is trying to explain to us in this last chapter the true nature of the mind. The mind, pure mind, when it is completely pure, it has no color of its own. It is without any color or what say modifications or any impurity covering it. So whatever we put in front of the mind takes the color of that, color form of that particular thing. Just like a crystal, a pure crystal, it takes on the color of whatever object kept in front of it. So if you keep say a red flower in front of the crystal, a hibiscus flower, a red hibiscus flower, the crystal looks red. If you keep a green object, a leaf, it looks green. The crystal takes the color of whatever object we keep. A pure mind is just like that. Whatever thoughts we put in, the mind takes the color of that. I got a happy thought inside the mind, my mind is happy. I put in a angry thought, the mind is angry. If I put in a spiritually elevating thought, the mind is calm, serene. So depending upon the idea, the thought, object, or person that we contact, the mind takes different forms. In the same way, when the pure mind is turned inside, inward, towards the Atman, it takes that nature, the nature of the Atman. Because mind by itself is colorless. Whatever put in, it takes the color. So if it is turned towards the Atman, the pure mind is turned towards the Atman, the mind assumes the form or the nature of the Atman. So Swamiji, explaining this sutra, Swamiji says, when the mind comes near Purusha, it is reflected as it were upon the mind, and the mind for the time being becomes knowing and seems as if it were itself the Purusha. The mind for the time becomes knowing. It's not a permanent change. For the time being, it becomes knowing because it has turned towards the Atman for the time being. And then it seems as if it were itself Purusha. And the mind thinks, oh, I'm the all-knowing thing. But it is not, it's light. It is the reflected light of the Purusha, the Atman. It is the borrowed light of the Atman, like the moon's light. Now we come to the next sutra. Drashta drashyora uparaktam chittam sarvartham. Colored by the seer and the seen, the mind is able to understand everything. Colored by the seer and the seen, the mind is able to understand everything. As we already said, to know anything, for any perception, there has to be three objects, three factors: the external world, the mind, and the light of the consciousness. So we see that the mind stands between the two, between the external object, external world, and the self, the Purusha. For the mind to know any object, it has to be colored. It has to be affected to some extent by the object to be known. And at the same time, it has to be illuminated by the light of the Atman. The light of the Atman which is eternally present. So two things, both has to come. The mind has to be affected by the object to be known, object to be perceived, and the mind has to be illuminated by the light of the Atman. Only then the mind can function. Modified in this manner alone, the mind is capable of knowing. If you remove one of the factors, the mind cannot perceive anything. The mind thinks it's all powerful, all pervading, and all that. But all its power is just borrowed, reflected power. It's not its own real power. As we said earlier, the light of consciousness is not there. If it is removed, the mind does not function at all. Our mind, ordinary mind, is modified, or it is changed or affected by many things. Our past experiences, our cultural background, our biases, our upbringing, all that affects us. And they all change the way we see things. The same thing, two people from two different backgrounds see differently, understand differently, react differently to that thing. I'm now speaking. Each of you sitting here will be hearing different things, understanding different things. Some sentence or point is completely meaningless to one person. Another person finds it, that's very, really good point. Each one's understanding is different, but the object is the same. And again, if the mind, consciousness is lighting the mind, but the mind is not attached to the object. Say, for example, I'm now talking, but you find it so boring. What a boring lecture. The mind wanders away. Now, the object is there in front. I'm standing in front of you. Your consciousness, your Atman is light, illuminating your mind, but you're not connecting with the object. Your mind is wandered away. So you're not hearing. You're not, the perception is not happening there. So when the mind is pure, it reflects the self-base inside. When the mind is impure, when it is colored by different objects, different impressions, biases and prejudices and all that, then it contacts or perceives the external objects, the world outside. So our aim is to turn the mind inward, to consciously detach ourselves from the external world. That is why we try detachment is important. And we have to learn to turn inside. The light of the Atman, light to be turn the mind inward, to shine on itself. Sri Ramakrishna gives the parable of the police surgeon going with the light and lantern. See the lamp in Sri Ramakrishna's time, the lantern that the police surgeon was holds at the hand at night is covered on three sides. So the light goes only on the front. So if the surgeon is holding the lantern in the hand, nobody can see his face, but he can see everybody else's face. So if somebody wants to see the face of the police surgeon, then he has to ask the police surgeon, please turn the light on yourself. So if you want to realize the Atman, you have to turn the light inward. At present, we are all looking out outward. That's why the Katha Upanishad says our senses are all projected outward. Paranjikani Vedrana Swayambhu Tasmat Parang Pasidi Nandaratman. Perhaps some rare souls turn the mind, view the gaze inward, and then see the Atman. We have to turn the mind inward so that the gaze is on itself and it can project or illumine the see the light shining within. And that is one of the prayer that the oldest prayer in the Gayatri. Dhiyo yona prachodayat. Illumine our intellect. Illumine our intellect so that we can realize the Atman, the self. At present, we are all wearing colored glasses. So we see the world colored with our biases and prejudices. If we see the wear green glass, everything is green. If you wear red glass, everything is red. Dark glass, everything is dark. Sri Ramakrishna gives us a story. A king had some illness and some problem with the eye. And the doctor checked him to the physician and gave the remedy. You should see only green things. Now, how can you see only green things? Now the king gave the order, called the minister and gave the order, paint the whole country green. Everything should be green. The doctor said I should not see anything other than green. Now the minister thought it will be going to be a big problem. People will revolt. Then you want the order and you say something straight away, your head will go. How do you dare to disobey the king? So after a day or two, he slowly came back and said, but have you done all these things? No, I have got a easy solution. It's a big job to paint the whole country green. I got an easy solution. What is that? You wear green glasses. You wear green glasses, you'll be seeing only green, nothing else. We are wearing green glasses now. We see everything in that color. For example, whatever we have within, we see outside. A child will see everything joy and happy. A greedy person, whatever you see, oh, if I see something, I can make some money there. A person who is always thinking about earning or increasing his wealth, see everything as an opportunity to increase his wealth. What we have, we see outside. We are always wearing different glasses. To see the reality, the truth, we have to remove all these colors. We have to wear the glass without any tint. That is why Einstein said, when you examine anything, free your mind from all prejudices. We all have got prejudices. Many times we are not conscious. When we say to a person, and a person says something and we say, you're prejudiced, you're biased. The person will argue, no, I don't have any prejudices. I'm quite unbiased. We don't realize we all have got our biases. We have to be completely free from our bias. We are consciously have to understand and strive for that. And the mind is, as we said earlier, mind is like the crystal. Whatever you put in front, it takes it. And the previous sutra I said earlier, the mind reflects the light of the self. It looks like the self. The pure mind turned towards us, kept in front of, it comes close to self, turns towards the Atman. It reflects the Atman. It takes on the nature of the Atman. It looks just like the Atman. That's why Sri Ramakrishna says, Shuddha Buddhi, Shuddha Man, Shuddha Atma Ek. The pure mind, the pure Buddhi, the pure Atma, they are all one and the same. To remove all this coloring from our mind, to make the mind pure, we have to be detached. It is the attachment to different things that make the mind impure, to make all these biases and prejudices all come because of our attachment. Many times we are not conscious of our attachment, but if you critically examine ourselves, then we realize that yes, there is attachment. And it is that attachment that is causing all these prejudices, biases, and preconceived ideas. That is why the detachment is given so much importance in spiritual practice. And the mind being between the consciousness and the external world is the most important or controlling factor, determining the mind determines everything, because it stands between the external world and the consciousness, the pure consciousness. Everything depends upon the mind. Sri Ramakrishna says, for the Vaishnavas, say, you have got the grace of the Guru, you have got the grace of the teacher, the grace of God, grace of Guru, both you have got. Now all you need is the grace of your mind. If the mind is not under your control, it will take you wherever it wants. So control of the mind is very, very important, because the mind stands, everything depends upon the mind. It stands between the external world or external world outside nature. When I say external world, it includes the internal world also, the nature. External world outside, thought inside, both. And the Atman, the pure consciousness. The mind stands in between. So we have to keep the mind strong, at the same time under our control, well controlled. If the mind is strong, and if it is not controlled, it will take you wherever it wants. You will be in trouble, deep trouble. But if the mind is weak, then also it will go away. The mind has to be strong, at the same time under well control. Many times we see our people having experiences. I had this experience. Many people say, I have experiences. What sort of experiences are they? They think they have got high spiritual experiences, maybe even samadhi. But it is all, most of them, I won't say all, but most of them are the results of weak mind, hallucinations, imaginations. Imagination running riot because the mind is so weak. Once a devotee came to Swami Sharadananda when he was in America and said, oh, that person is having a lot of visions and everything. And then asking some, and also he's feeling that when lying down in the bed at night, the bed is moving. Also, all this, or some experiences happening. The Swami listened to all that and said, oh, that's very good, but I would suggest that you make your mind strong. It's all because of the weak mind. So mind has to be strong, but at the same time, it has to be under our control. Otherwise, the strong mind will destroy us, the weak mind will destroy us. Both are not good. The mind has to be strong, at the same time, well controlled. That's why in the Katha Upanishad, when the sage talks about the chariot imagery, the mind is the reins. The senses are the horses. The sense objects is the road along which the horses are traveling. The body is the chariot. The mind is the reins that hold the horses in check. And the buddhi, the intellect, is the one who is holding the reins in hand, the charioteer. And the self, the Atman, is the passenger, the rider, the master of the chariot. So if the reins are held slack, the reins are too loose, the horses won't go properly. Or if the reins are held too tight, then also the horses won't be able to travel properly. The horses have to be strong. The reins have to be held tight properly. And for that, the charioteer, the buddhi, has to be alert. Only then buddhi can direct hold the reins properly and direct the horses in the right way. Only then will we reach the destination. So the importance of the mind is so great here. That's why Patanjali is trying to explain the importance of the mind, how the true nature of the mind, how the mind is working. We'll be continuing just a few more sutras in this chapter, and then we'll be finishing this one. That will be continued in our next class.
So it's time now for questions.
Right.
So if you please repeat that last bit with the sentence of the word and exercise of taking notes on this one.
Pardon me?
Just if you could repeat the last explanation of the mind and the chariot, the road, that because I missed some of it, I was taking notes.
Yeah.
So I've got the senses of the horses, the road, the sense of it, the reins of the mind, the chariot is the buddhi, up and the passenger, the chariot is what? That's all I missed.
Chariot is the body.
The body, okay, got it. Well, that's it. Thank you. Round it out.
I just wanted to ask you a question. So from the way you're describing it, you have the mind is sandwiched between the internal and external objects and the pure consciousness. Where does the intellect come in this? You have these three.
Mind, intellect is is another level of the mind or part of the mind. Because when we say mind, Manas has got 4 functions. So intellect is one of the functions of the mind.
Yes.
When you say the mind has to be strong and it should be under the control, now in the other say self-realization, all that, they are talking about the prana, and once you control the breathing, pranayama and all that, that controls the mind. So is it the same as what we are so talking about?
Yes, controlling the breath is your mind is brought under control. It is because the breath is the grossest form, and when the breath is controlled, the energy, the vital energy that flows through the body is controlled. We are able to control that, and slowly that controls the movement of the mind. But for that, the mind has to be strong.
If you are controlling the breath, that automatically, when the mind becomes steady,
Yes.
then it becomes stronger also, because you are not vitiating the mind.
Yes, that's right. When you're not wasting the mental energy.
When you say that you have to make your mind steady, say you were a bit upset about what you saw, what you did, and you have to make it steady, does that mean that everybody has their particular reference point that they come back to, And does that vary between individuals, that reference?
Yes, of course it varies because we are all in different levels of evolution. Our mind is in different levels. We have all got our own individual background, baggage that we have brought from previous lives. Our understanding, everything is different for each one. So each one has to work out and understand where is our baseline to come back.
People asking you lots.
Gayatriprana, just that last slide and quoting Einstein and this difficulty of managing our opinions and biases. Of course, these biases or opinions can often arise because there's something we strongly object to, and it's something that could objectively is quite wrong. And we're quite right, aren't we, to be having a strong opinion against it or being biased against it. And so how do we manage that? There are times when definitely there's a right and wrong, it's quite clear, and we're quite in the right to be biased against it.
Yeah, we have, well, we cannot say we have got the right to be biased against them. We are biased, that accept the fact, but then we have to try to understand why they are doing like that. It could be the way they are brought up, the way they are trained, the way they are educated. That maybe that's why they are behaving in that particular way. If we try to understand, put ourselves in their shoes, what they say, as they say. But that does not mean that we are approving their behavior, but try to understand.
That'll temper our
Biases.
attitude.
Yeah.
Last 10 of the glasses. There's almost an answer to you, Robert. I'm reminded of forensic matters that I did, one involving a hit and run fatality of a 2-year-old, and it was legal aid, and I got the job, and I almost looked at it, just initially looking at it, going, "Oh, I don't want to do this. This guy's not, you know, like his history was not like, you know, drugs and this and that and everything else." And you're going, why do I have to do this? And you're going, well, you've got the job. He has a right to a defence, and I do my job. So it was almost like I had this mental image of just pulling on this big rubber suit and just waiting. And then there's 3 aspects. Was he driving the car? I can't deal with that. He left the scene, he'd gone home, parked the car, went inside, was watching TV, and the police found him, saying, I don't know who was driving. Was it the car? Well, 2 witnesses identified all the numbers and the letters between them. And when you look at the front of the car, you can see the dents consistent with hitting a 2-year-old. So you go, well, it's probably the car. And then was the crash avoidable? So you go to the site and have a look. And you go, oh dear. From the top of the crest down to where what the flats was, you could see all the way to the front door, and that, so you could see the 2-year-old run across the courtyard and out onto the road and across. And what's he done? He's seen the kid coming and just swerves to the wrong side of the road, which is where he hit. So had he paid attention and just simply braked in a straight line, the kid would disappear to the other side of the road and nothing would happen. Then what do? Just write a report, give it to the client, and that's it. You walk away. And barristers changed, people ran away from court, they didn't want to deal with it. And in the end, he was found guilty and went to jail, which turned out to be just as well, because there was a feud between families. He was on one family and the kid was from the other family. So it wasn't deliberate, it was accidental, but unfortunately they were feuding families, and that, had he been found not guilty, you can imagine. So he ended up in the best possible place, jail. So that was, I just had to do my job, just do it. No opinions, no nothing, just do it. That's it.
like public speaking. To say something publicly, so I feel like I've lost my
Just
courage before, and now I'm on the spot again. I was just going to say, with respect to your comment, Robert, I think it was in a counselling session, sorry, and we were discussing this concept of bias. I think my counsel was being provocative and said, well, if someone came up and just scratched the side of your car, you'd be upset. And you have this concept of what's right and what's wrong, and that made me upset, that's wrong. But I think my counsel was trying to be provocative and saying, well, is it wrong? Why is it wrong? It's your construct. It's you know, law is a construct as well, to say that to damage someone's property is wrong. And just to try and look beyond that, to like diffuse it, see it for what it is, and just to see, and also to appreciate where that person came from as well, who scratched your car, to use the analogy. But I think my question too was in relation to all the other use of analogies to describe certain things, but this pure consciousness that we talk about. I know I'm using my mind and wanting a definition, but how would you describe that, if you can?
Pure consciousness, when we say it is the self with a capital S, or the Atman, which is the unchanging background reality behind this whole universe, including us. Everything is changing all the time. That we started with. The external world is changing, internal world is changing. We say, oh, I'm not changing. Yeah, I'm changing. My thinking is changing all the time. My understanding is changing all the time. Even as a child, I have understood. Adult, as I grow older, changing. Understanding is changing. We are changing internally, externally. We are changing. The world outside is changing all the time. But still, we see continuity. And what is causing the continuity, or what helps us to feel the continuity? There is some unchanging, steady factor. That is the pure consciousness. And take another example. Say a baby, so small, and grows, say 10-year-old child, looks so different. As a 50-year-old person, looks different. As a 90-year-old person, completely different. But all the time, that if you, the moment it starts speaking, let's say I. The I consciousness is there all the time. As a child, as a grown-up, as an adult, old person, the I is always there, unchanging, present in all the time. That is the consciousness. And that I is present in all of us. We all say I. So that is the consciousness present every day, pure consciousness, that the real unchanging reality behind the whole universe.
That just raised another question. We know that all the subatomic particles move furiously and they give the impression of solidity. And so the chair, that it's not, I don't see it changing from moment to moment to moment. So is that part of that continuity with pure consciousness being behind everything that allows me to see that as an unchanging chair? Because the consciousness is within me. Yeah. I see that. Yeah. So that's one reason why I don't see it as a collection of I see it as a chair, and it's the same chair, the same position that it was last time I was here, more or less. Because the consciousness is steady within us, everywhere we see that. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any more questions? We had the yoga class this first day as usual, from 10 to 15 a.m. We have the fortnightly discussion on the Gita this coming Friday night. Next Sunday, Sri Gayatriprana will continue a series of talks, monthly talks on the Mundaka Upanishad. Back. Thanks for coming in person, and thanks to those joining us live via Zoom.